When we use the term queer theory, we usually see it as a very 20th century phenomenon, as something closely associated with the closing years of the 20th century. It is true that the term queer theory came to be widely used in academia only in the 1990s. But there is nothing new, nothing 20th century about queer practices. Indian mythology, as well as classical mythology, speak freely of queer practices and of fluid sexual identities. In fact, they even go so far as to mention bestiality. For example, Zeus appears in the form of a swan in order to have sexual intercourse with Leda, the mother of Helen of Troy. And this is the subject of W.B. Yeats's well-known poem, Leda and the Swan. Sappho and Plato spoke highly of same-sex relationships. There are several passages in the Bible, in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, which have traditionally been interpreted as passages which denounce queer practices, though in recent biblical scholarship attempts have been made to question these interpretations. Sodom and Gomorrah have traditionally been symbols of cultures which encourage queer practices and which pay a very heavy price, a devastating price for the same. These tendencies against queer practices, supposedly embedded in the Bible, in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, became powerful influences in shaping mainstream Western culture, and one of the peaks in the matter was reached in Victorian England, where the love of one man for another man, for example, the love of one man for another man became, as Lord Alfred Douglas, Oscar Wilde's lover, memorably put it, the love that dare not speak its name. The love that dare not speak its name. It is indeed a long way from such a scenario to the rise of queer Studies. It is impossible not to remember the contribution of Michel Foucault in this context. Foucault established that sexuality is socially constructed. This Foucauldian perspective that sexuality is socially constructed, this Foucauldian theorization that sexuality is socially constructed, is the bedrock on which queer studies, on which queer theory is constructed, is built. Queer studies is sometimes referred to as LGBT studies. And LGBT studies is, of course, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender studies. But I feel that queer studies is a better term because it offers a wider semantic umbrella than the term LGBT studies. There are elements which need to be focused upon and which are, strictly speaking, not lesbian, not gay, not bisexual, not transgender. And by using the term queer studies, we facilitate the inclusion of the study of these elements. Queer studies and queer theory are not identical. Queer studies is the discipline. Queer theory is the theoretical framework. They are related and they go hand in hand. But they certainly are not identical. It has to be accepted that this is a vast and complex area which draws inputs from numerous disciplines, including history, anthropology, sociology, biology, philosophy, sexology, psychology, and religion. The earliest queer theory conferences were organized in American universities in the 1990s. And the credit for organizing the very first queer theory conference is frequently given to the Italian author, scholar, and academic Teresa de Lauretis. Teresa de Lauretis had by then moved to the United States, and she is credited with organizing the very first queer theory conference. Other early figures in queer studies and queer theory, other early important figures include Michael Warner, Judith Butler, and Adrienne Rich. Michel Foucault studied the normalization of heterosexuality in his monumental work, The History of Sexuality. He analyzes how heterosexuality, or the quality, or the characteristic, or the nature of being attracted solely by persons of the opposite sex, came to be looked upon as the norm in mainstream Western culture. Drawing inspiration from the set of perspectives developed by Foucault, queer theory says that there is nothing wrong in asking the question, what causes homosexuality? But queer theory says that we must also raise the question, what causes heterosexuality? Without any evidence, without any proof, let us not blindly say that heterosexuality is a norm and homosexuality is a perversion. Queer theory attempts to demonstrate the fallaciousness of traditional thinking, which tends to assume that sexual identities are natural and fixed. Instead, queer theory tries to demonstrate that sexual identities are socially constructed and fluid. In fact, constantly negotiated, constantly evolving. Furthermore, queer theory attempts to mount a challenge to the traditional thinking, which forms binaries such as gay, straight, homosexual, heterosexual, male, female. According to queer theory, in reality, there is no space for binaries. There are only pluralities. And it is the responsibility of queer theory to demonstrate that the binaries are artificial, that the binaries are false, and that the binaries have been artificially isolated in what is actually a field of pluralities. Thus, the main target of attack is heteronormativity. Heteronormativity is the world view that sees heterosexuality as the norm, that sees heterosexuality as the preferred sexual orientation, and bases this norm on a set of fallacious, artificially constructed fixed sexual binaries. I think that I said that queer studies is the discipline. Queer theory is a theoretical framework. Both explore the oppressive power of the dominant norms of sexuality, and the immense suffering caused by these dominant norms, which are simultaneously fallacious and artificially constructed. By these dominant norms, to those who are unable to or who refuse to comply with the norms. Queer studies and queer theory go beyond mere delineation, discussion, and exposure. They contain within themselves a call to action, a call to action to challenge, destabilize, deconstruct these oppressive norms of sexuality. Let us take a look at the key terms in the area. We begin with LGBT studies. LGBT studies is, as we have seen, the academic discipline that focuses attention on all the aspects of the lives of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. Queer studies is now the generally preferred term for LGBT studies, as queer studies is an umbrella term, is an umbrella nomenclature for everything that falls outside the ambit of heteronormativity. We should not confuse queer studies and queer theory. Queer studies is the discipline. Queer theory is the theoretical framework that is used as a lens to analyze, comprehend, evaluate, and explain everything that falls beyond the matrix of heteronormativity. Heteronormativity is the world view that sees gender identities as fixed from birth onwards and holds that heterosexuality is the norm, that heterosexuality is the only acceptable sexual orientation. Cisgender means denoting a person or relating to a person whose gender identity constantly corresponds to his birth sex. LGBTQ plus means lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer/questioning plus. The addition sign is positioned at the end of the term to suggest a sense of universality. It includes everything outside heteronormativity and perhaps also the allies of the cause. I think I said some time back that queer theory draws inputs from numerous fields, and these fields include history, philosophy, psychology, political science, ethics, biology, sexuality. Similarly, queer theory has tremendous applicability. It can be applied in numerous areas. You must remember that queer fundamentally means minority, sexual minority, the sexually marginalized. And so queer theory has tremendous applicability. It can be applied to literature, artistic creations, history, contemporary events, and even international relations.